Barry McLaughlin is substituting for Deputy Clare Curran. Before we begin, can we remind members and staff, members and the witnesses to turn off their mobile phones? Privilege. Before we begin, I want to bring to your attention witnesses giving evidence within the parliamentary precincts are protected by absolute privilege with respect to the evidence to give to a committee. This means that witnesses have full defence and information action for anything said at a committee meeting. However, witnesses are expected not to abuse this privilege and may be directed to cease giving evidence on an issue at the Chair's direction. Witnesses should follow the direction of the Chair in this regard and are reminded of long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that, as is reasonable, no adverse comment should be made as against an identifiable third person or entity. Witnesses who are to give evidence from location outside the parliamentary precincts are asked to note that they may not benefit from the same level of immunity from legal proceedings as witnesses giving evidence within the parliamentary precincts and may consider appropriate to take legal advice in this matter. Privilege against defamation does not apply to publication by you outside the proceedings held by the committee of any matters arising from the proceedings. Members are reminded of long-standing parliamentary practice effect that members should not comment on, criticise or make charges against either person outside the House or an official, either by name or such ways to make him or her identifiable. Parliamentary privilege is considered to apply to persons or members participating online in a committee meeting when their participation is within the parliamentary precincts. Members may not participate online in a public meeting from outside the parliamentary precincts. Any attempt to do so will result in a member having their online access removed. Let me take there, okay. Discussion. First session. The purpose of today's meeting is an examination of the deepening crisis in the inshore fishing industry in Ireland. The committee will hear from the following representatives from National Inshore Fishermen's Association, that's the NIFA, and for the first session the committee will hear from Michael Desmond, John Menery and Eamon Dixon. You are very welcome to today's committee meeting, gentlemen. Your opening statement has been circulated to members. I'll allow you 5 minutes to read your opening statement and then we'll proceed into a question and answer session. So, gentlemen.
Thank you, Chair. Ireland's inshore sector accounts for approximately 95% of the Irish fishing fleet. All vessels in the sector are less than 18 metres overall length, with the vast majority of them being less than 12 metres. The fishing boats in this sector almost all work within 12 nautical miles of the shoreline, with some exceptions due to various factors. Currently, the sector provides in excess of 50% of employment in Ireland's seafood industry, each job at sea accounting for 7 onshore, including those in processing factories, transportation, ship chandleries, gear manufacturers, marine engineering companies, electronic companies, to restaurants, seafood chefs and waiters. Inshore is an integral part of the economy to coastal communities. A combination of unforeseen events within the last 4 years, including the COVID pandemic, Brexit and the war in Ukraine, has brought unprecedented financial hardship to the doors of the families involved in inshore fishing the length and breadth of our coastline. The huge reliance on the shellfish fisheries proved catastrophic when the brown crab and the shrimp markets collapsed for a second consecutive year towards the end of 2023. One fishery that could have alleviated some of the pain was the sustainable pollock fishery, but to add further misery, this became a bycatch-only species after the EU December Council meeting. The reason for our over-reliance on an income from shellfish stocks is because of previous governments' decisions to prevent us from fishing species such as salmon, trout, bass, eels, etc. These fisheries were once the bedrock of rural coastal communities, but because of lobbying from anglers, representative groups and the tourism sector, with no coherent organisation at that time representing inshore fishermen, these vital revenue streams were taken from us, giving us little choice but to rely too heavily on lobster, crabs, shrimp, whelks, etc. The end of February 2019 brought renewed hope to the inshore fishermen all around Ireland when Minister for Agriculture, Food and the Marine, Michael Creed, launched strategy for the Irish inshore fishing sector to run from 2019 to 2023. This strategy set out a vision for the future of the inshore sector to provide a prosperous and sustainable future. It revolved around 4 main topics. 1, the organisation profile of the sector. 2, infrastructure and resources available. 3, the management of inshore resources. And 4, profitability of the sector. Amongst many issues to be addressed through the strategy was sustainable management of key fish stocks and the attracting and retaining of talent with a view to maximising the potential of this sector to provide support to Ireland's coastal communities. A number of inshore fishermen dedicated a lot of time and effort on this strategy, as it was also to include the targeting of financial supports available under the European Maritime and Fisheries Fund to programmes and initiatives where it would be used most effectively. BIM were tasked by the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine to implement the Inshore strategy, but we have heard nothing since. In last year's distribution of the Brexit Blue Economy scheme, funds from Brexit Adjustment Reserve Fund administered by BIM, there was up to €200,000 in individual grant aid for camping, glamping, grants for those who wanted to re-engine a whale watching or eco-tourism boat, but not a fishing boat. Millions of euros have been spent on various tourism projects in Ireland's coastal communities. While the inshore sector may have benefited to a very small extent from the fund, we feel that the sector was left behind to the benefit of other sectors. Everyone is now aware of the unfair and disproportionate division of pelagic fishing quotas at EU levels. What is even more difficult to comprehend is the manner in which these quotas are divided amongst the Irish fishing fleet. Mackerel, the most financially lucrative species to the economy, varied in quota allocations between 50 and 70,000 tonnes, of which 400 tonnes goes to the entire inshore sector for a hook and line fishery, the most sustainable method of fishing on the planet. This equates to less than 1% of the national quota for approximately 95% of the fleet. The herring allocation isn't much better, resulting in 5% for inshore boats. With the dynamics of the fleet changing, shouldn't the quota allocation also change? The current situation favours a tiny minority, while the majority finds itself continuously discriminated against. The European Coastal States Common Fisheries Policy, or CFP, as it is more commonly known, is used as a stick to beat the industry with. Yet the one good thing in it for the inshore sector, Article 17, is not implemented by our government. Article 17 requires Member States to allocate fishing opportunities using transparent and objective criteria, focusing on social, environmental and economic criteria, including, for example, the use of fishing gear with low environmental impact and reduced energy consumption. In short, the exact opposite to what is currently the case in Ireland. This might have something to do with the fact that NIFA are the only dedicated producer organisation for the inshore fishery sector. IMRO represent the islands and 4 separate POs represent the remaining 4% of the fishing industry. Through an inadvertent coalition, the minority of the fleet has become the representative voice of the fleet or of the industry. When NIFA was formed, no one could have imagined what a large portion of our time and energy would be spent dealing with the fallout from offshore renewable energy. Our offshore fishing grounds were sacrificed when we joined the EU, and our inshore grounds are now being auctioned off to multinational developers. The Minister for the Environment has stated that Ireland has 7 times more sea mass than land mass, and this must be utilised for offshore renewable energy industry. Yet so far, the only areas of sea mass we have seen designated for wind farms are the areas closest to the shore used by the smallest fishing vessels. On top of the ore fiasco, we are now told that 30% of our sea area is to become marine protected areas, commonly known as MPAs, with certain marine NGOs calling for a ban on fishing in its entirety within some of these MPAs. Shortly, inshore fishermen will need an MPA of their own to work within. NIFA fought alongside some environmental NGOs and the majority of the public who partook in the required public consultation necessary for a 6-mile limit around these shores a number of years ago. Boats over 18 metres in length were worked outside of this area. This in turn would lead to increased opportunity for inshore boats. Because of court challenges and legal issues, this has not progressed. However, it's almost 12 months since the High Court ruled against it on a technicality, and the renewed legislation process on it needs to speed up considerably. Bluefin tuna are swimming up and down our coast every year, with no Irish fishermen able to benefit due to lack of quota. We would urge the Minister to fight for an Irish quota for this species. Because of its high value, it has the potential to alleviate the problems faced by Inshore to some extent. Currently, fishing vessels from the far southern hemisphere are travelling to our waters to fish these stocks. Future threats to our industry include a ludicrous looming bottom trawling ban, plus the decarbonisation of the fishing fleet. There is an urgent need for financial subsidies to be made available to the inshore sector immediately, so that our members, amongst others, can play their part, stay afloat and weather the storm. Otherwise, hundreds of primary food producers will be unable to continue within the industry. Our organisation, NIFA, would like to thank the Chair and all committee members for allowing us the opportunity to explain our current dilemma.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Desmond. I think in my time, it is your first time being in here before us, so I think you gave a very comprehensive outline of your issues. Deputy Collins?
Yeah,
10 minutes, Deputy Collins.
10 minutes, okay, and I presume you're finished, and I know it's great to have the inshore sector before us here in the committee today. I welcome Eamon, Michael and John. It's a rarity, but it's a hugely important sector. It has put bread and butter on many people's tables throughout the country, especially in our coastal communities, and it has been under pressure, because I obviously grew up in West Cork, and I would be very close to a lot of friends of mine that are inshore fishermen, and they tell me the difficulties that they're experiencing. And you might be able to, answer a few of these questions for me and see, can we, in some way going forward, help you and put our shoulder stronger to the wheel than we have, maybe, considering the critical reliance on numbers of families across the expansive region of West Cork, and I know it, and throughout the country, Scull, Union Hall, Glendore, Castletown, Bear, and Adrigole, all the way into Bantry, Glengarriff, down to Kinsale, and various coastal communities on inshore fishing as a primary means of income. Could you provide a comprehensive analysis of the impact of the shrimp crisis that fishing on these fishermen and their families have had over the last 2 years?
Yeah, I could. Shrimp fishing, as you know, is vitally important to West Cork, because probably we have the highest amount of inshore fishermen in the Irish coastline compared to other coastal counties. But it's the same all around the coast from Donegal up. But in particular, West Cork will have more shrimp fishermen than anyone else. The season normally, traditionally, has opened the 1st of August and closes in the middle of March. Last year and the year before, it opened to the processors I'm selling to. It opened in September and closed the end of November in 2022, and in 2023 some buyers opened again in the beginning of September and were closed again at Christmas. So at the moment, those of us who rely on that source of income do not have an income. And the couple of processors that did stay open are opened in August. The prices were about 1/3 of what they were in 2021. And if you take into consideration the fact that our costs have spiralled out of control, as in fuel, bait, pots, etc., have doubled, and your income has come down by that much, it leaves the families depending on it in a very vulnerable situation.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Furthermore, the industry has been grappling with the issue of low prices of brown crab. Could you explain how this has influenced the overall dynamics of the industry, and what are the financial implications for the fishermen, and how has this trickled down to affect their families?
Yeah, in West Cork, a lot of the processors have continued to buy them, but the price has been reduced 4 times from May to November, and traditionally in both brown crabs and shrimp, the price should reach its height at Christmas, whereas this year they weren't buying them at all at Christmas, so when traditionally we would be expecting to get the highest price, we were left being unable to sell them. But they were still, John alongside me is actually a brown crab fisherman, if he'd like to come in on the crab situation.
Yeah.
John Maddy.
No, just to add to what Michael was saying, the processors in May that I supply usually open at early May. This year they didn't open till July. So you lost your first 2 months of your season and they were no longer open till they were told we got the call to say they were closed. They closed the start of November. And as Michael says, the most lucrative time and the best time for crab is coming up the lead up to Christmas, when you're expecting to make the bulk of your money to tide you over for the winter, but suddenly you're closed with very little warning and you're left with nothing else to fish because of the lack of other opportunities in the inshore sector.
Okay. The industry has been witnessing spiralling costs that encompass a wide range of factors from equipment to regulatory compliance. Could you shed light on how these escalating costs have added to the challenges faced by the fishermen, and how has this financial burden impacted their families, their quality of life and the future prospects?
Yeah, well, the price of everything is dictated by the price of fuel, whether you're getting product delivered or getting product taken away from you. So between the increase in cost of fuel for the vessel, first of all, and then the cost of storing and freezing bait, the cost of transport to market, all our costs have increased. But as primary producers, we are unable to pass on these increased costs, and we're supplying our suppliers, and in turn their costs are increasing. But they are able to cut the price that they paid us to soften their increase slightly. So we have to absorb our own increase in costs. We're getting the cut from the product we supply because of others' increase in cost. So we're getting squeezed from both sides, which in turn cuts your viability, which in turn you can't invest in your business. It's a struggle to maintain the business you have, which puts pressure on the people involved, their families. It puts an awful strain not only financially but mentally on people trying to survive with no supports.
You're saying there about the shrimp and the brown crab and the seasons have squeezed, there's a month or two off the end and a month or two off the start. Are they getting this products elsewhere?
No, I think from what we've been told by our crab buyers is there, between the cost of storing the product, they are not willing to buy product to store on the chance of selling it. They're only buying for what markets they've guaranteed. They're not willing to take the risks at the moment because of the cost of storage and transport and everything. They're not going to take the risk of storing product that they may or may not sell later, and the longer they keep it, the cost is going up for them, so their margin isn't there either.
And what measures could potentially address these challenges and ensure that the sustainability and viability of this industry for the future?
Well, at the moment, one thing that could be done immediately to relieve pressure on the shellfish stocks is give us back some of the stocks that we had the ability to fish previously, whether it was herring, mackerel or other such things.
Okay, and just one other question. I just noted there in your opening statement, and if I can find it somewhere, at the end of February 2019, brought renewed hope to the inshore fishermen all around Ireland when the Minister of Agriculture at that time, Marine, Michael Creed, launched strategy for the Irish inshore fishery sector 2019-2023. This strategy set out a vision for the future of the inshore sector to provide a prosperous and sustainable future. It revolved around four main topics, and the question I'm asking, considering the inshore strategy was launched but not implemented by both the current or previous government, could you explain the rationale behind its initiation, especially given that such an action in the private sector would likely have significant consequences?
Yeah, we believe that had that actual strategy been implemented, we wouldn't be here today in front of this committee. Simple as that, because you can see, if I have it here, this is the inshore fisheries sector. It was a very, very comprehensive document. It covered all aspects of the inshore industry, and it would have involved us meeting constantly with Bord District Vara, BIM, the department and the processors, so that if the processors were getting overstocked with a particular type of stock, they could tell us and we could ease off on that or do something else. We were supposed to be able to target subsidies through the European Maritime and Fisheries Fund. There was, including Eamon, spent an awful lot of time and effort into designing it, and it's by it not being implementing, basically Inshore, the lack of its implementation has left Inshore in the state it's in today.
Okay.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Loughlin, 10 minutes.
Thank you, Cahirla. And thank you all for the presentation that you've made here today. Those of us who come from coastal communities know the vital importance of the inshore fishery sector. So I think it's just so important to hear your presentation today, but also to get guidance in terms of what needs to be done. So one brief question I have first is, you refer to the decision to close the pollock fishery, and it was open to gillnet or hook and line. My understanding is the science behind that is quite questionable, in that it was based on landings rather than actual surveys. Is that? Do you have any understanding as to why it was closed?
From my understanding, some of it's based on landings, but also on bottom trawl surveys. And we know one of the major issues with the inshore sector is it's data poor. There's processes in place to record the data, but they're not, for whatever reason, it's not working. So there's a lack of data from the inshore sector, a sector that'll be very reliant on the pollock, but also on the surveys that are used that feed into the advice. Like, from my understanding, a lot of it was based on bottom or beam trawl surveys, which is a method of fishing that wouldn't primarily catch pollock. So if you use a method relying on data from a method that doesn't catch the fish, then you're not going to see the fish. And if you don't have the data from the inshore, the data is not going to be there. So the EU, in their hindsight, take the view, if they're not seeing it, then it mustn't be there. So something has to be done. So they basically close the fishery on us.
Okay. The reason why I ask that is, you know, you point out, and we know this, in the coastal communities, that there's a huge over-reliance on shellfish, and you point out about the previous government decisions around salmon, trout, bass, eels, and that leads me into this whole issue of mackerel and herring. I would ask you to maybe outline, and you have dealt with this in your presentation, what change needs to happen to have a fair allocation for the inshore fisheries in terms of mackerel and herring from the perspective of NIFA. What needs to happen? What is a fair point to arrive at?
Well, I suppose we have the situation where we have a minister that's advocating at a European level for us to have a fair and equal access to a common resource. And herring and mackerel quotas are a national asset. They don't belong to anybody in this country. And we have an underlying issue where, I don't know if everybody can see that here. The blue is the size of the inshore fleet, and this is the allocation of fish that's available to the inshore fleet. And here we have the larger vessels have access to this amount of fish. And like you don't need to be a rocket scientist to understand there's some imbalance there, and it wouldn't take a lot. We're not asking for a huge shift. There is, at the moment, 12% of the mackerel allocation, mackerel quota available to the polyvalent sector, but due to ministerial policy, that 12%, 97.5% of that 12% goes to 27 vessels at the minute. It used to be available to all polyvalent vessels, and as the term polyvalent means using many different forms, we could fish with hooks, nets, trawl for that allocation when it was available to us. But due to ministerial policy, that has been removed from us, and all we're looking for is to get access back to what we originally had access to before. We've heard numerous times on social media and stuff that the inshore's trying to take fish from here or there, taking it off somebody else, trying to just muddy the water, so to speak. All we're asking for is fair and equal access to what we already had access to before, because track record is a tool used to discriminate against inshore, because we're told we don't have track record to this fish, but we have historical records to this fish. Inshore was there long before anybody else was there, but that seems to be forgotten. But it's something that could quite simply be changed by ministerial policy. It's nothing at EU level or anything else. It's not about taking fish off anybody. It's just having fair and equal access to a national resource.
And you point out that the approach of the government is in contravention of Article 17 of the Common Fisheries Policy.
Not even Article 17. It's in contravention of the government's own policy on quota and how quota should be distributed. And it's in the government's own quota management policy that they don't want to do anything to privatise or have quotas in such a way that they could be sort of gathered together by larger companies, but be basing quota allocations on track record and attaching them to vessels. If you have the money, you can buy tonnage with the track record attached, and if you keep buying, then you're amassing that.
The next question now, and I think this is the big one, is I mean, you know, you've had shrimp and crab in crisis, and obviously the European market to a lesser extent. I think the Chinese market has also been impacted, and it strikes me that this is going to be an ongoing. So I suppose there's a linked question here. To follow on from Deputy Collins, the Inshore strategy, and I think the Inshore strategy was a really excellent piece of work, but the problem is, it read, it was a lot less jargon than you normally see in these reports. It was very action oriented. It was a good read, but the problem, as you say, it just hasn't been implemented. So, I mean, I just want to get a sense of, has Bord Iascaigh Mhara engaged to say we're going to now work with you to do that, number one, and number two, in terms of financial supports, I mean, it's clear that the inshore sector, you know, I mean, obviously you would like to have as much fish as possible. That's not happening, and we'll continue to work for that. But maybe just spell out the level of financial subsidy that you think would be required across the inshore sector to make it viable and sustainable. What's required here?
Yeah, basically we're delegating our survival into the hands of this committee today. You know, we don't have an income. I'm a shrimp fisherman. The people that are buying my shrimp aren't buying them. The people that are buying John Neyman's crabs aren't buying them. So we do not have an income. We can't get social welfare for self-employed fishermen, you know, it doesn't exist. But we're actually running businesses, you know, there's crewmen depending on us. Like, it's not just, like, it's more than, forget about paying a mortgage. Like, we can't pay your average household bill if you don't have an income. And we're looking, and we know that the farming sector deserve the subsidies they get. You know, they have the single farm payment, and like their world revolves around forecast the same as ours. But there was, you know, the new acres payment that came out, the sustainability payment, suckler payments, and we have nothing, like just nothing. Tough luck, lads, when our income disappears from us. So like, unless something is going to be done with regard to subsidies, like this is a whole section of rural community that's just going to disappear in the morning. And we have come up with a continuity grant for the last 3 or 4 years. It was called the Inshore Continuity Grant, whereby the money derived from inshore, an awful lot of inshore fishermen are now part-time through no fault of their own, but to distinguish between either or, what we said was 25% of the income derived from fishing, that you would get that yearly, so that then the part-time fellas wouldn't, you know, would be just getting 25% of what they got from the fishing industry. And all coastal TDs agreed with it in their position. They all wrote back to us. There was coastal TDs, part of the government stood up in the Dáil, and you could see everyone nodding in agreement. So, but nothing happened. Like, it's just words, and every 6 months someone would stand up and say, yes, give it to them, they deserve it. But that's all we hear is words and words and words, but never any action taken. And that's why we're here today, because like, if the department, you're going to get an answer from the Department of Marine now today saying that they can't help us because of budgetary restrictions and that they just don't have the money at the moment. But considering that we are providing 7 shore jobs for every sea job, then surely could this committee not talk to the Department of Rural Development, the Department of Enterprise, and come up with something for us for an immediate fix, and then afterwards, you know, to get some sort of a subsidy in place for us yearly. Like, that's 7-1. In Cornwall, it's 15-1 because of a well-managed, sustainable hook-and-line fishery. And that's what we should be aspiring to, not halving the jobs. And an awful lot of the money that's coming in from the MFA funding and the BAR funding is going to coastal tourism. And people will say that, oh yeah, coastal tourism is very important for jobs. But in coastal areas, it is for 6 weeks of the year if you get fine weather. But, you know, like, it's all very well that Gunter and Helga enjoyed themselves here for a couple of weeks. They'll be going to Spain next week. Paddy and Mary will be in Australia. There was 24 people from Baltimore and Skibbereen celebrated Christmas in Sydney this year. They're all left within the last 12 months. You know, like, and by helping us, you'll be helping the rural coastal communities.
Okay, so, thank you. Okay, Deputy Ring.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, just first of all, I want to welcome the delegation here today, and they're quite correct. They wouldn't be here, but there's a need to be here. What you want to be doing is fishing and be at home working, and not to be here making a case. Just in relation to the strategy that Michael Creed introduced, if that strategy had been carried out, would that have resolved some of the problems that she had?
Yeah, I think so, yeah, definitely would have done, Michael. To be honest, I suppose there's a couple of things. COVID probably, it was launched, I think, in 2019, and COVID came in 2020, and obviously we had Brexit and stuff. Things did happen that did interfere probably in ways as with it was hard to predict over those 2 years for sure. But I think had it been rolled out the way it was meant to be, it would have made a huge difference, because there's a lot of different stuff, as Michael had a copy of it there, and I'm sure you'll all be able to access it. And the important thing with that as well, there's another strategy due now, the inshore sector are starting on another strategy which is going to run till 2027, I think, in and around. And it's very important that we get the issues that are so important to us. A lot of them was in that strategy. There are a few new ones, but the majority of them was covered in that. We need to get those addressed in the very near future, and that's going to help. As Michael just said there, there's definitely some types of subsidies or some financial support is required, but if what is in the strategy can be worked on and some of that can start to be rolled out to us, that would be a huge help. The one thing with it as well, I think, is, and this definitely from the northwest, from my region anyway, we think in it, there needs to be some dedicated person left to actually coordinate it, be it from BIM or from some state agency, because if there's some of the issues that we've put forward in it that we want addressed, if they're not being rolled out, or if they're not being got over the line, we need to be able to go back to somebody. There needs to be a coordinator. You can't do very much nowadays in anything like that unless you have a particular coordinator. Nothing works right. If you have somebody that's dealing with the strategy, if I pick up the phone and ring them and say, well, Michael, such a thing hasn't been done, it's a key point in our strategy, we can't survive without it, well then if you're getting paid to do that job, you will go back to the powers that be and say the inshore sector needs this rolled out now. And that would be a huge asset for us in the future if that could be done as well.
Yeah, because we need to ask the officials when they come in here today where that strategy is and what are they going to do about it, and who has made the decision that that strategy wasn't going to be rolled out. And I mean, if a strategy was announced by a minister in good faith with the fishing organisations, well then I think that strategy should be continued. And that's what strategy is for, is to plan for the future, to plan to support the industry. To be fair to your industry, it's a very difficult industry. It's not an industry that there's people queuing up to get into. The amount of people that we actually have in it, it's hard to keep them in it. And if what's continuing is going to continue...
Can I just say something on the queuing up to actually come into it? There they're actually queuing up almost to get out of it, to be honest, Michael.
Well, I know
from an
that,
inshore sector point of view, I think people forget as well, and this is hugely, hugely important, and I know a lot of your rural TDs that's here and representatives from rural communities, but fishing is absolutely, it's like farming. Michael touched on farming earlier. Fishing is vital to the rural communities in which it is in at the moment, and that's all over Ireland, whether you go to Donegal or to Sligo, Mayo, down the coast, Limerick, Clare, wherever, any coastal county that's there, Cork, right along the east coast, Waterford, Wexford. It's so, so important to all of those counties. There's small rural fishing communities in every village there. Their kids go to the schools. They spend money in every single one of those towns. They buy their food there. They buy most of the stuff. They're not going elsewhere to spend their money. So if that's lost in the next couple of years, that will leave a huge hole in rural Ireland. Like, I know there's an election going to be coming up in the next 18 months or whatever, but I'm to be honest, in the past I've listened many times to people that's all inside in this house saying how important rural Ireland is to them. Well, if it is, it's time that they recognise it, to be honest, and recognise the issues that we have as fishermen in rural Ireland. If, you know, you can't say, oh, we love rural Ireland in one hand and then forget about it with the other hand, because if you do, then you're going to lose that. If you forget about something, that's going to get lost. So I think, you know, all political parties and everybody has the best intentions to actually look after those people, but we really, really need your help in making sure that that is going to be done in the future. And stuff like we spoke about here, better access to quotas such as mackerel and herring, you know, they are vitally important. The diversification, we need that back into, as John said earlier, the work, it was, some of that was quota share that we had and was only taken off us by ministerial thing in the past, ministerial decision. That can be reversed in the morning. You all know here, you're the ones who sit around every day making these decisions. It can be done. If all of the inshore sector in the country needs a small little bit share more of a quota, if some of you will have seen the presentation that I sent you that we've put forward to the department for the hook and line mackerel, look at the percentages that's there. There's almost 95, over 95% of the Irish fishing fleet at the moment is made up of inshore vessels. That's clear. That's BIM figures. That's not our figures. That's very clear. So that's only 5% on the other side. Yet we have only less than 1% of the mackerel quota, and in herring, as John said, we're down to 5% or in around 5%, and that is not viable. Like, you know, if you have to have something, has to be viable. If our families are to survive in the communities we live in, it has to be viable. Now, you know, you wouldn't turn around and give anybody that you know 1%, less than 1% of a quota, and hope, and that's 1%. Even to, you know, if we were a minority group and we were getting 1% of the quota, you'd say something. We were actually the majority group here by over 90%, and we're still getting 1% of quota. People would find that very hard to live with in any country in the world, to be honest.
And can the Minister, or it has to go to Europe, can he intervene now in relation to the mackerel and other stocks that are there?
Yeah, of course he can.
But can he actually make the decision, or has he to go to the European Council?
No.
He can make a decision.
Quota in Ireland is pelagic quota in Ireland is divided out by, as per the ministerial policy. The Minister can change the policy whenever he feels fit. So how quota is divided within Ireland is all down to the Minister. The Minister makes the final decisions on all quota allocations in the country.
Well, it's time now we start to put pressure on, because the other problem that you have coming down the line is in relation to the whole shellfish market and all that, and the people that are actually exporting it for you. You're the producers, you're the one that's actually selling it on, but then it has to be exported. And now with the new Brexit laws that's coming in, and they're actually on the way now, in the next couple of weeks, in the next couple of months, we're going to be hearing more about that. And actually it's going to be more difficult for your industry, because the other sector are saying to me that if something is not done in relation to rules and regulations in relation to Brexit, they're going to be out of business. So you'll be producing, there'll be nobody able to bring it to Europe to where the sales are. And
if I could just come back in on that, Michael, for 1 second. To be honest with you, and I clearly hear what you're saying, it probably will get worse, but it can get much worse, because I think I'm over 40 years fishing, to be honest with you, and it's the first time ever this year, in November of this year, we were told that the processor we sell to couldn't take crab any longer. They weren't in a position to buy it for any longer. So you know, most boats sell to dedicated processors, be it around in the different regions and where we fish, northwest, southwest, you know. And you just can't jump across and say, oh, to another fella, you'll take mine, because a lot of them will have the same boat sell to them all the time. There was nowhere to go. We were actually tied up in November of this year because we couldn't sell the product any longer. The live shellfish market was very poor at the time as well. There was a little bit of an increase in it for, we'll say, lobster there at Christmas, but that only lasted as well for, and even the buyers had confirmed this, it only lasted for a week or two. It was gone again straight away. So our hands are so tied. And like, we don't, to be honest with you as well, another very important point, we don't want to give this up. It's our way of life. We've been at it since we were kids. It's something we want to stay at, and we want to keep our families in those areas. It's critically important to us, but we need a chance to be able to do that. And unless that we can get year back for this, and when I say ye, I mean from all right across the political divide, we need help here, and we have to get it. If we don't, we will crumble, and it'll be a sad day when the inshore fishing industry is gone from this country. That's a guarantee.
Well, look, I listen to you, and the two big issues for you is there has to be some kind of a subsidy for now, short term, and the other thing that has to be done, we have to be allowed into the existing stock that's there. That has to be done immediately, or otherwise you're not going to be in it. And I think that's the ask, that the pressure we should be putting on the department when they come in here later.
Yeah, just you touched on Brexit and going to cause more issues for the inshore sector. There were 16 support schemes for the seafood sector from the bar funding, totalling over 420 million. Of that 420 million, the inshore sector got zero. Yeah, nothing. But yet we're being told we're being affected by it, but we didn't get the supports. There was almost $1 billion there of funding for supports on the inshore sector, the largest sector in the fishing industry, and we got zero supports from the bar funding.
And despite that as well, to add to that, despite that, we still, again, they're BIM figures, I think we still provide about 53% of the jobs that are in the fishing industry.
Yeah.
Okay, Senator Donovan.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I want to welcome the three men here from the Inshore Fishermen Organisation, the two Johns and Eamon, and I think something must be first acknowledged, and I acknowledge it, like, from my background in fishing, whatever, the inshore smaller guys were totally disunited historically, and it's great to see it coming forward as a national organisation, and I wish you well and wish you every success. You know, I was listening to, when I was a young fella growing up, that the small boats must stay near the shore and the bigger vessels can venture more, and that's the difficulty you have. And if you go more than 5 or 6 miles from the shore, you're kind of, if I say it in a positive way, you're out of your depth. And I suppose one question I'd put, and I was listening to you there very attentively, that most of these issues could be resolved by the Irish government, by the department. We can't blame EU here. Because a small tweaking of, say, the pelagic quota that you're looking for, going from 1% say to 5%, could you tell me what difference that would make to the inshore lads? Now, some of the markets and that issue we may not be able to resolve, but like, I suppose some of this here around these houses and stuck in politics nearly 40 years, I would put my hands up and say the political system has failed you.
It's a good question, Dennis, and I think if you do look at it, it would make a colossal difference to us, because it would keep the people in our communities. It would keep the, I'd go back and we've even mentioned the GA. It would keep a GA team in a village, in a town, because if you keep losing the young people, how are you going to replace them? Like, it's like anything, it's like in politics. You have to have young people coming through. We have them there, the families are there, they're in rural Ireland, but the problem is we are losing them because the opportunities isn't there. For me, even for my own boat, I have 2 young lads. One of them is in college, the other guy isn't. It's very difficult for me to say to him, you know, come fishing with me, hold on here, you'll be able to make a living out of this going forward. I'm not, as it stands today, he would not be able to do that. the opportunity is there if we were given access to it, but at the moment we don't have it. So what you say is a seriously important point. If we were to get a little bit more of, definitely, as John said, it's not something we hadn't before. If we were to get back some of the pelagic quotas we had for particularly mackerel and herring, then that would give us that opportunity to be able to do that, and we would be able to hand those boats on to other people, knowing that they were able to go on to make a living out of it. And that's all you can ask for in any way of life. To be able to make a living in the community that you live in is so important to everybody.
Just to follow on from that, like we've talked a good bit here about mackerel and herring and the crab issue. Not all fishermen around the coast will go fish herring or go and fish mackerel if we got those opportunities. But if you take a chunk of vessels out of the crab or out of the shrimp, just because one man say, oh, there's no point, that's no good work, them men are wasting their time up here, herring and mackerel, no good to me. But if it takes pressure off the shellfish stocks for him, it increases the market demand, it helps him. So it's very important to remember for people watching this today too, that by directing some of the fleet in another direction, it takes the pressure off those that are left behind.
Could I also, I suppose, suggest or ask that if there was a bit of imagination and innovation and thinking outside the box by either BIM or the department, that to give you a little break, a little leeway, or some tweaking of the existing setup, it would go a long way to resolving the issues that you have. It won't resolve everything, but obviously it seems that the tide is against you, and I'm just wondering that a bit of innovation or a bit of imagination by the department to say, listen lads, you have an issue here, can we help you in any way? And in that regard, do I feel for me that you feel isolated from the body politic and by the department, by BIM?
Yeah, or if I can just come in on that for a second and say, that, you know, we are being told at every turn when we talk to the department that these quotas are a national asset. Every member of the state has a right to that quota. And, you know, it is there that all of these quotas, whatever they're for, should be shared out in a fair and viable manner. And we just feel that as inshore fishermen, when it comes to any quota, it's not just the ones we've spoken, we are always at the bottom of the pile. We're being forced, there's regulations there that's forcing us that it's almost impossible for us to continue. That's the way we feel as inshore fishermen. Like, even if there is quota, by times there's regulations around it that makes it so difficult for us to be able to try and make it viable to land it.
We're looking at the monitor there, the two citizens here, because there's a vote on, and we're told that a bit like yourself, the whip is on us, and I'm not sure if we have to go or not. But just coming back, I think it's an issue that should be emphasised more and more. Like, it's very interesting to hear from you that for the one man that's out fishing, and I think people should understand you're talking about boats from 6 or 7 metres up to probably a maximum of 15 or 17. You're creating 7 jobs on shore. And that is, I'm nothing against the bigger boats and whatever, but what I find out down my own area, whether it's Castorbear, Ewan Hall, the vast majority of the crews in those boats are not even Irish. They probably can't get local fellas, because you won't get a young fella from Scull or from Belmullet or from Donegal going out for a 7-day trip. It's not conducive to them. So I think that I think that the whole reality of what you're achieving in the 7 jobs on shore, because if you take the fishing out of the Mizen Peninsula where I live, the same might be in Belmullet or West Kerry, I'll tell you to be very depleted. You won't see too many inside the local shop. And then another thing I'd like maybe to clarify, that when you're not fishing and you're tied up for whatever reason, weather, or it could be markets collapsing or a lack of quota, whatever, what do you get? Is there any funding? Say, listen lads, you're tied up for 2 months, we'll allow you access to some social welfare contribution. Maybe one or other of you could explain that to the committee, because sometimes we're ignorant of these situations. We think we know everything, but you're the people on the ground.
I suppose even asking that question, you're viewing us as individuals. Every vessel is a business. Well, even if it's only one man in the boat, it's a business. And we've been talked about before with the departments about social welfare and other opportunities. But we have a business to sustain. So if you're talking about giving a man what you get in the dole, it won't sustain your business. It won't sustain your overheads. It's the view people have of fishermen as just men, individual people. We're businesses, as you say. We support the 7 jobs ashore. Even if when we're ashore we're spending money, we're buying gear, we're maintaining gear, we're maintaining the vessels. When we're ashore, that's when we're spending probably our most money. When we're fishing, we don't have time to spend the money, so it's a dangerous thing as a fisherman ashore with nothing to do. But at the minute, we don't have the money to spend, and our businesses are suffering. And if our businesses are suffering, then other people are suffering further down the line that you don't see. But even back to your point about the crewing on larger vessels, Inshore was the breeding ground for those people in those larger vessels. Every one of those guys will tell you started off Inshore and progressed, but there's not the demand isn't the right word, but there's not the competition in the inshore sector where there's guys not fighting to get into it, and some guys are being pushed onto those larger boats. So a weak inshore sector is affecting those larger vessels, but they don't. It's very important that they see that as well, that their problems with crew is because they're not being developed and nurtured in the inshore sector.
Yeah, the clock is turning down, but one other point of interest is that you obviously have an issue with the 6 nautical mile exclusion zone, and I find that hard to comprehend because I grew up on the shores of Bantry Bay, and in the old British Empire stringed, back not before the state was ever formed, there was rules and regulations preventing the big trawlers that they're half the size that are now. There were timber trawlers that one rule is that between sunset and sunrise there was no trawling. And the notion at the time that it would come in and encroach on the lives of the smaller fellas inshore. Like I was looking out Skull Harbour there a week before Christmas, and there were 2 vessels. Obviously, they were a lot more than, in my view, 18 metres, and they were pair trawling inside the harbour, I think for pilchard or whatever. I couldn't believe it was going on, because the money they make in that is small, and as far as I know, the pilchard, it goes in for whatever use they make it. But yet they're encroaching and damaging the pots and the lines and the gear that the fishermen, the likes of you, have to put up with. And before I conclude on this issue, could anyone of you tell me that, and it's a small number, if you were to start off in the morning and say, put out 300, a couple of lines of 300 pots with the cost of rope and gear, whatever, what would it cost you to start off in the morning with, say, 300 pots, which isn't a lot?
Well, roughly a pot nowadays, a finished pot to buy, is probably just short of €100, to be honest, when you've paid everything on it. That's what we'll say when it's roped onto a string of pots. So you can make up the figures for yourself if you want from that.
That's about 30 grand if my sums are correct for the start off.
That's just to the gear, that's not the
And
boat,
just finally, what's the situation with the 6 mile limit? Are we wasting our time, or?
Well, it's in the government's hands. You know?
Common sense should prevail,
Yeah,
because you can't go 50 miles and encroach on other territories,
like
you know.
there's legislation, there was that, you know, there was legal issues over it, and now we're waiting for the minister to restart public consultation on it again, and we're just waiting, just see what will happen. But like, there's a lot of misinformation out there with regard to the 6 miles, that it was that we wanted pair trawling banned, or we want, like, we never asked for any method of fishing to be banned ever. We have members that take part in dredging, hook and line, netting, bottom trawling, everything, like, and it wasn't fishermen that came up with this in actual fact. Like, it was the Department of the Marine that asked Inshore would they back a 6 mile limit where boats over 18 metres would stay outside, be restricted from fishing inside there. And of course the Inshore said yes, we would, because it would increase opportunities. But now we're being told, like, there's a lot of NGOs.
Deputy Myden.
Thank you very much, Carla, and thank you very much to John, Michael and Eamon. I listened attentively to what you have to say. As John said before, like, these fishermen, like, they're businessmen. Very often, a lot of them take out a mortgage and a second mortgage on their house to buy their boats, which is very, very serious. So we understand your family commitments there as well. Just maybe on the 6 mile limit, you said there was a technicality on the department side. Where is that at the moment, or how can you progress it, or how can we progress it forward? That's one question, lads. And just, I would like, just in your report here, to be honest about it, BIM are not actually shining light here. They don't seem to be cooperating with you at all. Chairman, Chairman, I would like to. Chairman. Sorry. Thank you very much. I'd just like to propose that this committee write to the BIM and see what the position on their strategy, why they haven't cooperated with the inshore fishermen. I'd also like to propose that we invite the Minister in to address the problems that these people have today. And also, like, I listened, seemingly there's just 3 or 4 points here that you've made that are very straightforward. You just told us that the situation is it just needs a change in policy, which can be done by the Minister. That's one thing you're saying. You're saying there's 12% available to the sector as well, to quota, you know, that's available. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And and as you also said, you need kind of another direction for people to shift in different ways in different fishing industries. So like I said, the bluefin tuna. We know that is a very lucrative fish. We also know that we were sitting here and we sit on things ourselves, and the Chinese are coming in and they're sweeping them up. And it's one of the most expensive.
As well, Johnny, you know, that's not something that we actually, again, you set out for. It's just, it has happened through climate change and stuff.
Yes,
go back 10, 15 years ago, there was no issue with bluefin tuna. There was probably the odd one around, but they've just accumulated now. Talking to lads on the south coast, there was so much of them. And even on the northwest coast, in Donegal Bay this year, they were there in abundance. Like, you know, you'd be lucky not to catch them now if you didn't want to be honest. Like, you know.
Well, I've spoken the same off
And another important point on it, a lot of countries in Europe at the moment are looking for, we have a small bycatch I think on them to allow the guys that do the albacore to operate, but to be honest, Ireland should be looking for a dedicated tack for bluefin tuna going forward, to be honest.
Well, definitely, because it's just...
And for a hook, or again, you could have a line fishery for that, a dedicated line fishery for it. Quality of the fish would be way better and stuff in that as well. Like, you know.
Well, I'm kind of with some lads in Kilmore myself, and they tell me they're just looking overboard and they're seeing all these fish going by and they can't catch them, and they're watching the Chinese across, 100 metres away from them, and they're cleaning up on it.
On that bluefin tuna point, there is a quota there, an EU quota there that the Minister can ask to get, and whether he gets it or not, we don't know, but he can ask for it. But just from when the UK left Europe, they were last year they had a quota of 65 tonnes, which would be a massive benefit to the inshore sector, even just a small quota like that. And that 65 tonnes was only was a quarter of 1% of the EU allocation. So we're not talking about hundreds of tonnes here or massive amounts of quota. And then just on you asked a question there about the 6 mile as well, sorry.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
About the legislation, exactly where it is at the moment, or can it be progressed, or can we help it?
From what we've been told, they're looking into it again, and they have to assess the data again because it's such a timeline since it was introduced first. And we feel there could be a fear now because of the increased activities from when the ban was introduced first now, and the increased in activity, that they could turn around now and say, oh well, there's much more activity there, we can't implement it. So you could have another case of where, because of the failed implementation of the policy, the inshore sector is suffering even more because of the increased activity, because of that failed policy. But on the point of the public consultation on that, I think it was the largest response in the history of the state to that policy, or to that public consultation. Was over 900 responses, which was the most ever. So not even from a fishing point of view, if the Minister can ignore such a public response, it shines a poor light in the department, I think.
Just off of my own coast, like the Wexford coast, the marine protection areas, a lot of the inshore fishermen are very worried about the future, what's it going to take, or do you think you envisaged a ban on fishing in that particular areas, or what is the position on it?
Well, we would hope not, but we know that certain marine NGOs are looking for it. If MPAs are coming, whether we like it or not, marine protected areas, we're aware of that fact. But they can't be just brought in with no fishing area for the sake of it. You know, you can hear certain NGOs, there should be 10% of the waters where there's no fishing. Where? In the inshore grounds? In the offshore grounds? Or it doesn't matter, just some, like, if their 10% could be my 100%, you know, if outside Belmullet the bay is closed, or Inver is closed in Donegal, or Roaring Water Bay is closed, if that's part of 10%, then that's our 100%.
Well, Michael, it's envisaged that there's going to be 30% within 2030, which is 6 years away. Yeah. You know, it's 30% of the fishing.
Yeah, but it needs to be done based on sound scientific and environment. That closing this particular area has to be based on, you know, certain environmental and scientific facts that will improve it. And so far what I've seen, like I've seen different NGOs say about 90% of surveys of MPAs state that they will be successful because it is. But then when you look into it, 85% of those surveys are theory surveys because there's not that many. So, you know, everyone knows that theory is a word to describe something that doesn't happen in reality. You know, like if you look at, I know a bay that has an SAC in it that we're not allowed to fish for scallop. So in theory, the scallop should have improved in that bay. It hasn't. So, you know, like they have to talk to stakeholders before they go closing anything.
A very good example of that, and this is something as well as very important for you all to hear. I think, you know, you will hear that maybe in the past that inshore fishermen were kind of a broken group and that they were more often sometimes arguing with themselves and stuff than they were with the powers that they should actually been doing. But I think something that has really strengthened how inshore has improved over the last couple of years is if you look now at what's happening with the offshore renewables and with the committee that was set up there chaired by Robert McCabe. I think they actually had a meeting today. Inshore has integrated into that absolutely brilliantly. Like the work that's been done by all of the people that sits on that committee, not just the inshore people now to be fair, but it does show that if inshore representatives are given a chance to work with people, they're well capable of doing it, and you can find successful solutions to most of the problems. And the same will be with the MPAs and stuff. If the powers that be sit down with the inshore representatives, there can be ways as found that fishing shouldn't be banned really in any area, that there can be ways as of mitigating the effort that you're doing there in order to be able to continue some of it.
Thank you. And Chair, maybe you could have a seconder for that proposal, two proposals they proposed.
Onto the floor, Chair. It's open to the floor, Jenny.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, seconded.
Thank you.
Are you finished, Deputy?
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
His proposal is to bring the minister. Yes. Yes. Yes, indeed. So both were seconded by Deputy Collins. Okay.
Thank you.
Fitzmaurice, joint contribution.
Thanks, Chair. First of all, I was listening to your submissions. A couple of things springs to mind. I noted you stated that 30% of the fishing area is going to be under pressure with new regulation or designation. Is that the NRL you're talking about, the nature restoration law?
Separate again.
And where do you fit in the nature restoration law if you look at that?
It seems to be coming without us knowing. We're finding out more about it daily.
And can you explain the 30%? Because like if you have 30% and the nature restoration law, you'll hardly put a boat out anywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
That's our fear.
Exactly.
I met with Minister Noonan, I think it's 2 years ago now, and I said to him, and I was kind of half joking at the time, between MPAs and everything else, offshore renewables.
Are you talking about SACs, SPAs?
No, MPAs, marine protected areas.
Right.
It was actually mentioned that the socio-economic part of it is, I said to him half joking, and you get more worried as the time goes along, inshore fishermen are going to need an MPA to operate in, because we're getting that so much squeeze between SACs, Nutra 2000, offshore renewables. Where are we going to operate in? We might need an area protected for ourselves. And just on the point of MPAs, we don't have a problem with MPAs in theory, but you have to identify what needs protecting first. You can't just say we're going to protect this area here what's it going to be protected for, what needs protecting, and once you know what it is that needs protecting, what does it need protecting from? Because we encounter whales and dolphins and all sorts of wildlife every day we're at sea. We're no issue or no threat to them. So if they need protected in the area, it's not from fishermen they need protected from. So it's very important that there's proper engagement and fishermen are listened to when these MPAs are being in.
The one thing I would advise you do, and I'm no expert on fishing, so I'm not going to go claiming something I'm not, but I would have followed the nature restoration law. In the next month it's going to be voted on, brought in Brussels. And I know that marine areas has been watered down a bit, but if it's anything to go by at what they're proposing on land, even watered down, it would be detrimental if the same consequences would be for the likes of the fishermen. So I would advise you to be fairly watchful on that, because like we're even getting parts of it now when you get legal advice, that any MEP that votes for it next week will be a traitor to this country, in my opinion, because there's even parts of it now that will show you that on designated areas you will be forced to rewet if you go through all the different parts of it. Everyone was talking about Article 9 for fishing, for marine and for land, but Article 4.1 and 4.2 and part of 56 is going to catch everything, and that's on legal advice that we've got. So I would advise you watch that. On the other thing, ye talked about, and I was listening to you on the, is it bluefin?
Bluefin tuna,
yeah. What's the, are you saying, did I pick you up right in saying that boats can come in from other country and park off, be it Donegal or down south or wherever?
Well, they come to the edge of the 200-mile limit, the territorial limit.
And they can...
They fish, you can see it online, you can follow the territorial line.
And ye can it?
No, we can't.
And what will it take to try and help ye in that situation?
Political will to look for a bluefin quota for this country. That's what it is. At EU level, it'll have to be sought and fought for to get it.
Okay.
That's what it boils down to.
So it's basically down to a minister.
Other countries are doing it, Michael, at the moment.
To be fair to the minister, he can ask for it, but it's at European level that it has to happen.
Battle has to be had there.
Because there is an awful lot more of them in the area than there used to be.
Oh, yeah.
What we have is laughable that even we have such a small share of herring quota in Donegal. The fish that we catch, some of it has been block frozen, shipped to the Mediterranean, the fattened bluefin tuna that have swum in our waters, that are caught in the Mediterranean, are put into cages and fattened. So not only are the bluefin tuna here feeding on our stocks, the wee bits that we do catch are being shipped off to follow them to the Mediterranean to feed them up even further.
Okay, that's all I have to ask. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, we'll try and move forward quickly if we can. We're way over time, that's already.
7 minutes each.
Yeah, so we'll go 7 minutes each for the non-members, and I'll contribute myself for the end. Okay.
Yeah, I really do appreciate that, Chair, because I'm not a member of this committee, as you will know, and I want to welcome you here today, particularly Eamon from Belmullet, obviously. I'll ask a couple of quick questions together, and the first one is around, we've been fighting this for a long time in terms of the distribution, the fair distribution of quota. What rationale has the Minister given for not addressing that 95% of the fishing fleet is getting less than 1%, that's of the mackerel quota, and only 5% of the herring quota? So why is that? The other question is, why do the inshore fishermen get none of the 420 million euro when they provide 53% of the jobs? And thirdly, just in terms of the redistribution of the quota and the lack of data that was there previously, if you like, is it a situation then where fishermen and fishing boats of the 1,600 inshore boats, where they're being forced to conceal the full catch because they don't have the quota? Just in terms of the single payment, I want to ask you as well, or the payment, is there another country where there's a subsidy like that, you know, so you have your single farm payment, you have a single boat payment or whatever, where that's done? And has there been any costing done on doing such a payment here, both taking into account the actual monetary layout, but then in terms of the jobs that it would save and the contributions to the community and that? So maybe if any of the three of you could address those few things.
I can take the money side of it there if Eamon wants to do the quota afterwards. Of that bar funding, it was the Brexit Adjustment Reserve Fund. And everyone knows the effect that Brexit had on the fishing industry in Ireland. But we weren't allowed on the task force because we weren't a producer organisation at the time. So we had to feed into it and give our opinion. Now, the reason we were given no financial aid whatsoever out of that 95% of the fleet, got no financial aid whatsoever out of however many hundred of million it was, they said was because we could not prove that we were negatively affected by the quota being decreased. Now, the biggest decrease in quota was in mackerel, which was 25%. But we were denied access to the mackerel quota by our own government. And the reason we lost 25% of the mackerel quota was because Michel Barnier's negotiators saw which quota is affecting the least amount of people. And when they saw that the mackerel quota was only affecting 40-something boats, then they gave away 25% of that. So, you know, it was ironic, but we lost out both ways. Now, we gave plenty of reasons why we were affected by Brexit, but we couldn't use them because they weren't specific to the fishing industry. We were told by both Department and BIM officials at the time, we can't say that because sheep farmers could say it. We can't say that because chicken farmers could say it. So, because we might have opened the door to somebody else able to claim the money outside the fishing industry, we weren't allowed to use those reasons. And therefore, we got 95% of the Irish fishing fleet got no direct financial aid out of a bar scheme which was supposed to be for the Irish fishing industry in Brexit. And there was 48 million in a tie-up scheme for the larger whitefish trawlers, which they deserved. No one's saying they didn't deserve it. There was, I don't know how much the decommissioning scheme came to, something similar, 26 million for the pelagic boats. And for 95%, sorry lads.
Just on that, like everybody else in our supply chain, we're the primary producer. Everybody above us got supports and funding, but we're all told we're all links in a chain. But as primary producers, we're the anchor at the end of the chain. And if you lose that anchor, that chain's lost. But we're the one, we didn't get any funding, didn't get any support. So to say, we were told we weren't directly impacted, but everybody we supply was. So it's hard to understand from our point of view.
Take it into consideration as well in that the licences we have are all the same licences. They're all polyvariant fishing licences at the end of the day, bar some very specific ones, but they're all polyvariant licence. And even the small actual 1% share of mackerel that we do have was considered as, it was called an allocation, so therefore it gave us no entitlement. Pollock wasn't considered for it, which a lot of the inshore vessels were catching. Again, we were given no entitlement for that. It was almost as if the actual species that could get support were handpicked and the ones that the inshore were fishing were actually left out. That's almost what it boiled down to at the end of the day, which was crazy really, to be honest.
And on the question you asked about whether other EU countries able to avail of subsidies for their inshore, yes. Both fuel subsidies and direct subsidies. In Spain, the inshore fishermen are able to get it out of the European Maritime Fisheries and Aquaculture Fund, known as the INFA fund. And in that, even though we had the double whammy of COVID and everything, but within that, the European Commissioner for Fisheries, Mr. Sabinicus, wrote in this thing called Article 26.2 that because of the war in Ukraine, that each coastal state could use as it sees fit money to target the fishing sectors that were affected by the disruption of market. On the 13th of December 2022, it was read out for the Minister, and then it wasn't applied for. In 23, it wasn't applied for. We told them it was there. They told us it wasn't there, and now we got confirmation in January of this year that yes, in fact, it was there, but too late, lads. So that's why we're here, is can ye are going to be told by the department that there's no money there this year, because there really isn't this year. And could ye possibly, from somewhere else within the other rural developments or enterprise, give something, like it wouldn't be 1% of the farmers in Ireland?
Yeah, so that was negligence by the minister in the sense of not availing of that fund, not making it available.
It was the 13th of December and they were closing for Christmas a week later, I suppose, but still we found out afterwards that it was still available.
Thank you. Deputy Healy.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairman. And I know you're under pressure, so I'll try to be brief and to the point. First of all, I want to thank you very much for being here this evening, because it is very important. It's very timely. Over the last, to be honest, number of years of putting down parliamentary questions and raising issues on, in particularly, the plight of inshore fishing families, the one thing that never ceases to amaze me is the way that, because of, and you gave a perfect explanation of it a minute ago, Michael, that it's like not a whammy but a double whammy of knock-on effects of, well, why you can't and why you won't and why we're not able to. Like, it's like every door you go to, the door is closed firmly in your face. But what I'm doing is I'm looking at other sectors. And rightfully so, there is assistance. There's bailouts, there's help, there's assistance, there's tax concessions, there's every type of support, and rightfully so. But the one group of people that are continuously left behind is the people who get a full-time or more now predominantly part-time income from inshore fishing. And I know in the county that I represent, I have an awful lot of, and when I say an awful lot of course, it's not very big numbers, but my goodness, aren't they as entitled to be taken care of as anybody else? And no matter what sector you're in, you'd like to think that your groups, which I know you all do in an excellent way, and aren't they entitled that their politicians should be standing up and talking for them and fighting and advocating on their behalf? But I suppose the question that I have for you here, and we're coming to the nub of it, and that is, what can be done even now to try and save these families and the people who are involved in trying to make a living, a modest living or part-time living, and what can we do? And that's why it's so timely that you're here today, and that's why it's so important that you're here. And this is a cross-party issue that every one of us, whether we're in opposition or whether it's government supporting representatives, we should all be singing off the same hymn sheet. And that is, this is a sector that is in dire trouble. Do we want to lose it or save it? And I think we're actually at that type of a crossroads. And we've lost so much of what I would call our core important things. For instance, in different types of farming, small farming is gone out the window. It's getting more and more difficult. We've lost Bornamona. We've lost an awful lot of great things that we had in the past. One thing that I certainly don't want to see us losing is the whole validity and viability of a person being able to be involved in fishing in a small way. And like I said, that it might be a part-time or full-time living towards that person and their family. It's very, very important. So what I'd be saying to you here this evening is to work with us in trying to help us to help you and the people that you represent. And I thank you for representing them in a good, strong way. And your lobby group, like you're pulling your weight, fine, but like I say, every door you go to, the door has been closed in your face. Thank you.
3 minutes, gentlemen. Yeah.
Yeah, no, just like the Deputy talks about doors being closed in our face, we had a meeting just before Christmas and we sat for maybe 30 to 40 minutes listening to department officials telling us what they couldn't do for us. I put up the comment, I was on 10 online, I put up the comment, I don't care what they can't do for us. no more than what this committee here that we're here looking for help from. What you can't do for us is irrelevant, and we don't need to hear about it. We need to hear what can be done. And just on Deputy Walsh's question about the quota and the rationale about how it's distributed, we've been told on numerous occasions that for us to get more, others would have to take less. But it's not a case of, there was never a mention of when we had to take less so others could benefit. There was never a mention then. So it's a null point from us. And those that have the quota at the minute have been very well rewarded, and rightly so, due to the losses of Brexit. So I don't see why a small amount of that could be given back to the sector that lost in the first place.
Yeah, we're not taking that quota off. Like, what we're doing is asking for it back. There was, once upon a time in Ireland, there was a national quota where all men were treated equally. You know,
we just need a viable share, to be honest. Just as Deputy Healy-Rae has said there, and we said it earlier here, it's about either whether it's another link in the chain. It takes a lot of things to make up inshore fishing. Everybody knows that. It's no one thing. There's 4 or 5. Most inshore boats will do 4 or 5 things if they have to diversify between them. But we need it to be viable. If the share we have is not viable, which all you have to do is look at that presentation that we sent to you today from NIFA to see the share that are there. Like we said it earlier to the chair, a national school child that's in 2nd class could look at those diagrams and say, what's going on here? This is not acceptable. It wouldn't be acceptable to them. And it goes back again, and I know you supporters, and I say it's about where we live. It's the communities that we represent. You represent those communities, and you do it very proudly as well. Well, we do it in a different way, as in being fishers in those communities, and we want to keep our families in it. And it goes down to Healy-Rae's comment as well, that they're all links in the chain. You see about small farmers, I hear every day about pubs and shops closing in villages and stuff. That's all because it's different links that's been lashed out of the chain all the time. If you can try and keep those links together, that's what keeps those communities going. So, and inshore fishing is one of the most important things still throughout the country in that chain, and we just need to make sure it survives.
Okay, thank you. If I could just ask myself regarding your own industry, just give us a brief outline of where you think the industry is since last November. Effectively, you've been tied up since last November. When do you expect to be actually back into water, actually making a living? And how did you actually survive in the last 12 weeks? Like, not farm assist, fishing assist, that kind of method. As John rightly mentioned, you're small businesses, you're not just individuals. Like, give me an indication of how your communities are surviving, in particular, the last 2 months.
Borrowing and stealing, I suppose. You know, we can't get money. You can't go into a bank or a credit union or any financial institution and ask them for money, and why do you need it? Because the market has collapsed. Okay, when is it reopening? I don't know. Are you going to give that person money? Like, it's just been impossible for us. Like, it's just, you have no idea what it's been like for the likes of us, and it's just nothing. No matter how many times we ask, like, this isn't the first time, you know, well, it's the first time we've been here, but like other coastal TDs have stood up in the dark for years asking for something, and they all agree, but no one ever does it. So,
okay. Regarding
where we've been since November, yeah, like, it's gotten 100 times worse since last November, but is there any sign of it getting better? No. Not without political will.
Where is the brown crab market now at the moment? Where is that market going forward? Like,
to be honest, Chair, it's still very fragmented. I think it is. There's issues in it. We're being told there's poor economy. Again, some would relates back to the Ukraine war and stuff. A lot of it. There's poor economy in Europe. With a big, you know, there was what looked like was going to be something that helped us there. And it's interesting when you mention farming and access to the Chinese market. We were getting back to regain a little bit more access to that market. But then at the same time when that war happened, the Russians started sending crab into the Chinese market really, really cheap through, maybe not directly themselves, but through another country. And that basically took the Irish crab out of it again. The Chinese didn't want to pay for it. Obviously, if they're getting a cheap product, they're going to take it. So there are issues around it. And from what we're being told by the people we sell to, that, you know, they don't know how next year is going to be. Certainly, they're saying don't be expecting anything big. So you can take it nearly that prices are going to be low again and very hard to make it viable again. Like, you know.
Could you explain to me the lack of data in your industry at the moment? Like some of your, like you don't need a logbook if you're under a certain level. Like going forward, what changes need to happen at the department level? So number one, we can collect the data, we understand what's happening on the ground. And number two, if there is issues because of that data is collected, we can prove that there is a significant drop in actual production, so you could fight your case for actual compensation.
On the data side of things, the process that's there's what's called sales notes. So when I sell my product to a buyer, within 48 hours of that sale taking place, that buyer is supposed to submit the weight and species that was bought and what was paid for it, and that's supposed to be submitted to the SFPA within 48 hours of that sale. But there seems to be an issue whether those sales notes being submitted to the SFPA or at the SFPA level, but the data just seems to disappear. When there was issues with that and guys inquired about their sales notes, then sales notes seemed to, whether they came from buyers or whether they're stuck in the system, whatever, they seem to come in dribs and drabs and lumps. And we, at a previous meeting, asked the SFPA office, because it's a regulation, it's supposed to be law or whatever you call it, that a sales note is supposed to be within 48 hours. And we asked if a sales note then appears weeks or months later and is submitted, then surely then there's somebody's broken the law or the regulation, whatever, is there repercussions, but we didn't get an answer from the SFPA. There's processes there, and what I'm trying to say, there's processes there, but they're not working.
Regarding the huge issue of the breakdown in the market, in the shellfish market in particular, like you need to diversify into other markets. Traditionally, you've access to mackerel previously. If you got more access to market, would you have the opportunity to actually fill the potential quota there? Like in 2021 or 22, you had significant access and you made a significant volume of landings. Would you explain to us what happened then and what was the actual volume of landings?
I think it was in 2021. The regulation was being changed at the time, and it was kind of an open fishery for that season. And I think before we were stopped, we had landed around 1,250 tonne, the inshore sector.
1,200.
Yeah, because we've been lobbying for an increase in the hook and line quota for quite a while now. We've been doing it through NIFA, through different smaller organisations throughout the country. And in that year, we were given a significant chance to land, to prove that we could actually land quota, and we did do that. We were stopped in, I think it was the middle of June of that year. But there was
but January to June, you managed to land.
Well, not maybe January to June, Chair. To be honest, probably started around middle of April, May, depending on when the fish come into inshore waters that we're allowed to catch them. But it was from whenever we started, maybe the middle. It could even be the beginning of May, but up until we were stopped on, I think it was the 9th or 10th of June.
That was a significant, issue that you can actually fill your income with that kind of money, with that kind of landings.
Yeah,
like that's kind of what you're talking about here in many ways.
Yeah, very much so.
Gave you the actual income to survive because you could actually diversify on that occasion.
You see, I suppose just one, like when the fish are there, you need to be able to take them. Again, we're restricted sometimes by quota management, and the people who manage the quota makes regulations. Now, we were adamantly against some of the ones they made, restricting us in. If you restrict a boat to only landing 6 tonne for the month, once that boat is that 6 tonne landed, be it takes them 3 days or 10 days to land it, they're then basically tied up because they're not allowed to go out again. Like you take us in relation to the bigger boats, you would not restrict one of those larger vessels that's going up to Scotland to catch their quota. You wouldn't restrict them to 6 tonne. They wouldn't go if they were restricted to 16 tonne.
All your landings are made in Ireland, obviously. Because
all made in your local area. They're all small boats, don't steam very far, they only go a small little distance, a couple of miles.
Do you have any issues then with the actual regulation regarding landing?
No, we don't. Like the other thing about it is, I think every fisherman will tell you, if you have something that's fair, everybody will work around it. Like, nobody minds playing by the rules once you have a fair share of what you're at. And I say, you can quantify a fair share once you have a viable share. It has to be viable. It has to be worthwhile to do it. You wouldn't be here, nobody will do a job unless it's viable that they're going to make a living out of it. That's a given, I think, for every citizen in this country.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. I think you clarified many of the issues. We'll now... Okay. Okay, we'll allow Okay, on behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank you for your contribution here. We'll now suspend to leave the witnesses to actually leave. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Okay, back in public session. Witnesses, you're more than welcome. I'll now just read the privileged part of the process. Before we begin, I'd like to bring your attention. Witnesses are giving evidence to the parliamentary precinct and are protected by absolute privilege in respect to the evidence to give to committee. This means that witnesses have full defence on any inflammatory action taken against anything they say in the committee. However, witnesses are expected not to abuse the privilege, and when directed to cease giving evidence by the chair, they should do so. Witnesses should follow direction of the chair regarding and reminded the long-standing parliamentary practice that they should have a reasonable country about third parties or parties of third person in interpretive. Witnesses should give evidence outside the location. Outside of the parliamentary precinct are expected to note that they do not benefit from the same level of immunity from legal action. Privileges against defamatory do not apply to the publications by you outside of the proceedings held by the committee on the matters raised by these proceedings. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll now move forward if we possibly could, and I'll read out the next part, which is... Okay, so we've three evidence of legislation that need to be... So one is COM 22.3 4945. The second one is scrutiny of COM 2023 578, and the third is COM 2023 587. You're giving evidence regarding all three, and we've witnesses here from the department who are going to deal with it. We've Sinead McSherry, Suzanne Brennan, and Anna O'Sullivan. You're all more than welcome. You have 5 minutes, if you could, to give us a presentation regarding these three COMs. Thank you.
Committee members, first of all, thank you for the opportunity and the invitation to speak to you today about fishing opportunities. My name is Sinead McSherry. I'm the Assistant Secretary General with responsibility for seafood and marine in the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. I'm joined by my colleagues Suzanne Brennan, Head of Marine Programmes Division, and Anna O'Sullivan, Head of Sea Fisheries Policy and Management Division. Before I go into detail of the Commission proposals highlighted by the Committee, I'll give a brief overview of the process for setting the fishing opportunities for the EU fleet. The tax setting process. Most of the commercial fish stocks of interest to the Irish fleet are covered by the total allowable catch, or TAC and quota system. Following the UK's withdrawal from the EU, some 40 of the fish stocks in which Ireland has an interest, which were previously exclusive union resources, are now shared resources under international law. Only two small stocks, plaice and sole in ISIS areas 7BC, that's off our west coast, for which Ireland has a quota, are regarded as EU only. Mackerel, blue whiting and Atlanto-Scandian herring are agreed at coastal state negotiations. The TAC for albacore tuna is set through the International Commission for the Conservation of Atlantic Tunas. The European Commission has sole competence to negotiate with third countries on behalf of the EU on the setting of fishing opportunities. The negotiations of significant interest to Ireland are coastal states, EU-UK, EU-Norway-UK and EU-Norway. The process for the negotiations is as follows. The EU Council sets down a mandate for the negotiations. Member States are kept closely involved throughout those negotiations. Meetings between the Commission, Council Secretariat and Member States are held regularly during the negotiations, and Member States are kept fully briefed by the Commission and advised of progress, and in turn input their positions and concerns through these coordination meetings. The Commission also undertakes to keep stakeholders informed of the process of the negotiations. Once agreement has been reached, for example, between the EU and UK, the Council must consider and approve the draft written record of the negotiations before it can be signed by the Commission on behalf of the EU. Minister McConalogue met with stakeholders throughout the negotiation process. The Minister also undertook a Sustainability Impact Assessment, an SIA, as part of the preparation for the tax setting process. The SIA draws its conclusions from a consultation process with all major stakeholders and expert contributions from the Marine Institute and Bordis Guara. The objective of the SIA is to look at the overall impacts of the proposal and what it could have on the sustainability of the fishing sector from a biological, economic and social perspective. The Minister also met with stakeholders including fishing industry representatives and environmental NGOs to give a further opportunity to stakeholders to outline their positions. The Minister presented the SIA to this committee on the 25th of October 2023. Regarding the Commission proposals highlighted by the Committee, I will begin with Proposal 587. This is the proposal for the main TAC and quota regulation for 24, covering the stocks found in the North Atlantic and the North Sea. This includes the stocks found in the waters around Ireland. Where the scientific advice for a stock hasn't yet been received or international negotiations for stocks are still ongoing, when the proposal is published, the fishing opportunities for those stocks are marked as pro memoria in the proposal. As these negotiations had not concluded when Proposal 587 was published, most of the fishing opportunities were listed as PM. In previous years, as the EU-UK negotiations had not concluded by the deadline set out in the EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement, provisional tax and quotas had to be agreed by ministers at the December Fisheries Council. This was to ensure a continuity for fishing fleets pending the outcome of the negotiations. However, this was not necessary this year, as all third country negotiations concluded in advance of the December Council, meaning that the final full year quotas would apply from the 1st of January 2024. The coastal states negotiations for 2024 took place in October, and the coastal state parties agreed on setting tax for coastal state stocks of mackerel, blue whiting and Atlanto-Scandian herring. The EU-UK negotiations for 24 began on the 24th of October 2023, and the written record was signed by both parties on the 5th of December. The trilateral negotiations between the EU, UK and Norway began on the 20th of October and concluded on the 8th of December 2023. The bilateral negotiations between EU and Norway began on the 7th of November and concluded with the agreed record being signed by the parties on the 8th of December. The final outcome of the tax setting process for 2024 represents a balanced result overall. Ireland has increases for a number of our important commercial stocks, including prawns in the Porcupine Bank, Celtic Sea monkfish and megrim, and Northwest haddock and whiting. Restricted bycatch only tax have been set for vulnerable stocks to help them recover. Most significantly, Minister McConalogue successfully negotiated a permanent allocation of additional mackerel for the Irish fleet, which is worth approximately $3 million annually for Irish fishers. Commission Proposal 495 relates to an amendment of the 2023 TAC and quota reg to set the definitive TAC for anchovy in waters off the coast of Spain and Portugal and waters around Madeira and the Canary Islands. When the 2023 TAC and quota regulation was adopted, the scientific advice for this stock had not yet been published, and provisional TAC had been set to allow for fishing to continue. This proposal did not impact on Ireland, as we do not have a quota for this stock. Commission Proposal 578 relates to setting fishing opportunities for stocks in the Mediterranean and the Black Sea for 2024. Ireland is not involved in this proposal, as we not have fisheries in these areas. I hope this information has been helpful, and my colleagues and I are happy to take any questions you may have on these proposals.
Thank you. Deputy Collins? 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. Yep, I'll be perfect altogether. And thank you, Sinead and Anna and Susanna, for being with us today. I suppose when it comes to fishing, it's a very difficult subject, because we had the inshore sector there in with us earlier, and they're painting a very bleak story. National Inshore Fishermen Association painting a shocking bleak story, and I would appreciate if you have a chance to maybe play back and listen to the facts. And the facts, you'd like to say, shouldn't be on the ground, but the facts are actually where they don't want to be is on the ground, because they can't go to sea. Because of their stocks and because of so many issues, and no compensation. They haven't the brown cent to put food on their table, and there is no system in place to compensate these inshore fishermen. And they're very strong in their voice there, but it also goes to those in the Irish fleet, because we have an estimated 75% of all fish caught in Irish seas are caught by non-Irish fishing boats. In other words, the Irish fishing fleet is allowed just 25% of the 1.2 million tonnes of fish that are caught in Irish waters each year. The underdevelopment of the Irish fishing industry has hit isolated rural communities very hard, particularly along the coast, where other sources of employment are limited. Without work, people are left with little option to move to the cities or immigrate to other countries. Other comparable non-EU countries like Norway and Iceland have taken much better advantages of their fish resources, developing not only vibrant fishing fleets but also major spin-off industries in areas such as food processing and boat building. A properly developed and managed fishing industry could contribute billions of euros annually to the economy and provide much-needed employment to isolated rural communities. Such a developed fishing sector would help provide much-needed balance in an economy that is currently over-reliant on US multinationals. In order to achieve this, we need a minister that will prioritise the needs of the fishermen. And in fairness, you mentioned about .23.587, COM23, and that, with no disrespect to you, is a bit like foreign language to me, you know. But the bottom line is, the fishermen why isn't the minister succeeding in getting quotas out there? And like he'll say he did get some little piece extra in was it the mackerel there before Christmas, but like nothing significant has been seen to come our way. Brexit took as much as it could away from us a couple of years ago. It was a handout of Irish our fishing stock.
Sorry enough to interrupt you. There's a vote been called. Can I ask, is there anyone actually paired in this for this vote? You're paired. Yeah, sorry, no, Deputy Collins.
Just an point of information.
Indeed.
Sorry to interrupt there. There's 15 votes, I'm told now. 15 votes.
No, it's not the voting block. This is the vote on
the gas. I think it's going into voting block then, is it?
No, not immediately.
Not immediately.
I'd ask that the session be suspended because it's not fair on TDs who might want to come back in again. And this will be one vote. This is not the voting block.
So what I'll say to you is this committee has always worked through votes over the last 3 years, during challenge votes like we had in the last few minutes, and all votes where it's appropriate. And we'll have a member who's going to contribute, who is not paired, who's paired. I'll keep the actual committee going.
Okay.
Otherwise, we'll be here till 12 o'clock tonight.
We'll be back. We'll be back.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll be back in 10.
That's no problem.
Is that okay?
Okay.
I'm in mid-flight, but I can.
All right. Deputy Fitzmaurice, 10 minutes, sir.
First of all, thanks for coming in.
I apologise for the interruption.
In relation to the previous group that we had in, and in relation to your planning going forward, the nature restoration law is a new law proposed in Europe that has consequences for the marine areas. What forward planning has been done on that? I know that the law has only been in progress for the last year. It has been voted on the, I think, the 26th to the 28th of February or something like that in Brussels. Where do you see the consequences for Irish fishing fleet because of that law in relation to the marine?
Thank you, Deputy. I suppose in preparation for today, my focus has been on the Commission proposals, but to briefly touch on the nature restoration law, it is a significant development. It is requiring significant interaction between all people involved in operating at sea. I think the main issue for ourselves is to ensure that the cognizance is taken of the existing operations, whether that's fishing at sea, and that any measures that are taken, and again, I suppose my own department isn't the department responsible for implementation of the NRL.
Yeah, you're not the lead department.
And that we would engage heavily with them, with the lead department, in order to look at any issues arising from the nature restoration law and its implementation.
And has there been any engagement between your department, say it's Arts, Heritage and Gaelic that seems to be the lead department in it, because you have areas like at the moment probably the Porcupine Bank is designated, but this will put another layer on, you know, there's talk about 30% of areas, and I know that the marine part of it has been watered down a bit, but there's like targets that you have to achieve. Have ye had any engagement as yet with, say, we'll say a multidisciplinary department overall, that all the departments get together to understand the consequences and are the things that you'll be looking at in putting in on fishing vessels for using or for fishing in those areas that'll be pinpointed, because Ireland is down under that nature restoration law as having basically a large sea area, which we have has there been meetings in which had your department any meetings with the lead group or with the Department of Agriculture or with any other department housing in relation to this law, because it's around the bend in a month's time?
Our department has engaged with the lead department deputy, and in terms of the targets, you're correct, they're very ambitious and delivery will be complex. And I think you mentioned the potential economic impacts on our industry. The consultation is ongoing and the obligation is on member states to put in place restoration measures on at least 20% of its seas by 2030. So officials in my own area, with the advice of the Minister, have been engaging with the other departments responsible, and I'm not in a position to go into any detail as I don't have it with me today.
Well, yeah, I'm not asking to go into detail. What I'm saying is, has there been meetings over the nature restoration law between say ye in the fishing area as well as Arts Heritage and Gaeltacht? It's a straight question, yes or no.
I'm not clear on Arts Heritage and the Gaeltacht. I am clear on on Arts Heritage and the Gaeltacht. My own teams have met with the Department of Housing team, which is leading out on it.
It comes under that, just that you know. And do you envisage problems or more regulations for fishermen under that?
I envisage that any of the measures that Ireland has to take will have to be considered and applicable. And I haven't looked at any of the individual measures at this point. So in terms of the burden on fishers, I'm not clear on what that will be, but I am clear on the sense that we will have to work with our industry to implement any measures that are necessary.
Right. The previous group that was in spoke about, and I'm no expert on fish now, I want to be clear on that, I'm fairly well inland, but they spoke about, is it bluefin tuna, is what you call them, that because water or weather has changed, that there is a lot of them on the Irish coast and that they cannot fish them. Is there any attempt at EU level by Ireland being made to facilitate that we would get, my understanding is that other boats from other nationalities can come into our area and fish them, and what I am inquiring is, because of this change, is there any quota being fought for or being given to Ireland to facilitate our fishermen?
Thank you, Deputy. So bluefin tuna, as you mentioned, is a highly migratory stock. It spawns in the Mediterranean and then it migrates all over the northeast Atlantic to feed. We do not have a national quota. Ireland does not have a national quota for bluefin tuna. And the only way to obtain a share of that EU quota would involve changing the relative stability key within the European Union. And that would require a majority of member states to agree under the qualified majority voting system to reallocate some for Ireland. Ireland does have a small bycatch bluefin tuna, and that's primarily for use in our albacore tuna fishery and the Celtic Sea herring fishery, where there can be bycatch, and you need to account for that under the landing obligation. The Minister has, on several occasions over the last number of councils, made a case to reopen that allocation key in order to secure a quota for Ireland. As you can imagine, naturally that's resisted by those member states who do hold the quota at the moment, but it is something the Minister has addressed regularly and will continue to push for at EU level.
Can you explain to me, from a person that wouldn't have the in-depth knowledge of it, that we have one of the largest sea areas in Europe, and there would be a lot of discontent among the fishermen that they would feel that others have got a proportion of of the fish that's in our area. Can that be revisited? That would give more quota, especially to the smaller operations. I'm not talking about the big, I see some of the boats, if you can watch it on a map there, some boats come in towards our area and they can mop up, it's like they can mop up a huge amount of fish compared with it's nearly like the commercial farm and the family farm. Is there anything that can be done for the smaller operators to make them more sustainable? Because the previous speakers that was in here are saying that it is getting more difficult.
I think, Deputy, all of the fishing opportunities are dealt with in the context of sustainability and ensuring future stocks for, I suppose, future generations of fishers. So all quotas that are determined by Council are in the context of scientific advice on how to fish those. Within the Irish system, there are several policies that have been determined by the Minister and are published on how that quota is distributed between the fleet, and that has to take into account a number of factors, and any changes to those policies would be a matter for the Minister to take
So
away.
the Minister can change the policy to help the smaller, or whichever way he wants to go, can he?
On policy matters, it's a matter for the Minister.
Okay, so the Minister has the right to do that. In relation to, you might bring me through a small, and maybe it's...
Can I just go back one step with you? In respect of any changes to policy, the Minister will have to go through a rigorous process that includes public consultation. It's not a matter of a stroke of a pen. There is a full process which includes a full public consultation, review of scientific data. All of those matters would have to be considered by the Minister in making his policy, but that's a policy matter then.
Deputy Fitzmaurice, we'll come back to you. Time is up.
Sure, who's going to talk? Give me... Sure.
I'll have 10 minutes. I'll come back after you.
All right, sure, sound.
Thank you, Chair. And I can come back to you from Cott. Look, first of all, thanks for your presentation. Could we start on the comms in reverse order, if you possibly could? So, 578, Black Sea, Mediterranean. We never were out there. We have no fishing out there ever. Would that be true?
We don't operate a fleet out there. And there's no fishing opportunities out there.
So, don't ask me why I was there. Okay. So, that's the first one gone. So, 495. Limited fishing out there, say, at the very least. Would that be true?
Well, Senator, 495 is in relation to the waters off the Spanish and Portuguese coast and around Madeira and the Canary Islands, and the Irish fleet do not fish for anchovy in that area.
Thank you very much indeed. That's 2 of the 3 issues put to bed in a very, very short space of time. Right. And regarding, I suppose, let's be fair, the other com is probably the most, is the serious com regarding where we are regarding the North Sea, and that is. Could you just elaborate on that if you possibly could? Because I think of all the 3 comms, I don't know why the first 2 are there, but the other ones is probably where we are. Could you elaborate about the Norway and the third country involvement in this negotiation and how that actually happens? It's an issue that comes up about how Norway do have access to our waters and what do we get in return and so forth and so on. But just so we can get a better understanding of how the third country element ties into this com and ties into the whole negotiation practice.
Okay. Thanks, Senator. The European Union is one of the coastal states that looks at fishing opportunities in shared waters. So, for example, you have the EU, you have Norway, you have Iceland, you have Greenland, you have the Faroes, you have Russia, and I'm sure I'm forgetting someone, but there's a number of states who all share waters, and then the UK in the Northeast Atlantic. And in those situations, obviously, there is advice issued in respect of stocks and the available stocks, and then the EU negotiate with those other coastal states in relation to determining the level of stock to be fished and then the share out of those stocks. So the Commission have the competence, they have the sole competence to negotiate with other third countries. So in the EU-Norway situation, the EU and Norway, either as coastal states or in direct negotiations, will look at stocks of common interest and areas of common interest. So I think The question you may have asked, Senator, is about Norway and the EU and access to the EEZ.
Yes.
So the exclusive economic zone, there are several within the EU. There are waters for which the EU can negotiate access to. And in times, a lot of fish stocks are migratory, so they don't tend to stay in the one place. So fleets have to move with the stock at times in order to have access to it, and that's what those negotiations are about. And equally then, some of the negotiations are about the distribution and the allocation of the relevant stocks.
We've often heard what Norway gets in the negotiations from the European Union side of things. Like, what does the European Union get from Norway on that side of the negotiations then?
From the EU's perspective, the EU fleet get access to Norwegian waters and some of their quota. And I will defer, Senator, if I may, to my colleague Anna O'Sullivan, who's just more familiar with this particular topic.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, Sinead. Yes, there's the EU-Norway bilateral agreement. It kind of dates back to about, I suppose, the 1980s when it was first put in place. It involves, there's a few layers to it, I suppose. One is that there's an exchange of fishing opportunities. So Norway gives EU a share of Arctic cod quota, and in exchange then the EU provides quota of various stocks. The one of interest to Ireland will be blue whiting. We don't have a huge quota share of the Arctic cod. Blue whiting will be an important stock to us, so it's always an important issue in the negotiations to keep that level of blue whiting as low as possible. And both this year and last year, that it was kept to a minimum at below the cap actually this year of 4%. Our beg your pardon, of 7.4% of the global, that would be the total blue whiting cap, blue whiting attack, I beg your pardon. The other aspects then of the EU-Norway agreement is, as Sinead mentioned, there's access for EU fleets to Norwegian waters to fish for Atlanto-Scandian herring. There are also other aspects for for stocks in the North Sea that will be caught by member states that operate in the North Sea. There are also kind of other agreements that go alongside that EU-Norway agreement relating to a neighbourhood agreement with Sweden because of their proximity, and also in the waters around Sweden and Denmark, in that area called the Skagerrak and the Kattegat, how the fisheries are managed there, which Ireland doesn't have an interest in because we don't operate there. Our main interest will be in the EU-Norway main agreement, which deals with the blue whiting transfer and the level of access for ash. We've often heard commentary regarding that they make up their own quotas, or their quotas are quite fluid in on the Norway side of the house. Now, with the scientific evidence about how we actually control our stocks, is there ever a concern about making sure we're not in a scenario that we could be overfishing, with the potential that Norway might be maybe involved in some kind of changing their own numbers kind of scenario? Well, at the moment there aren't current sharing agreements in place for the three main coastal state stock: mackerel, blue whiting and Atlanto-Scandian herring, and there are negotiations ongoing. They've been ongoing for a year or more at this point, so that the coastal state parties, which would be EU, UK, Norway and so on, as Sinead mentioned, could come to an agreement on sharing arrangements. There was, in the case of mackerel, which will be our most important pelagic stock in Ireland, the sharing agreement that was in place between the EU, Norway and the Faroe Islands had been in place since 2014. To Brexit, it would have been in 2021, Norway broke from that agreement and set its own unilateral attack, and the Faroese followed suit, set themselves a national quota higher than what had been in the past. And the Minister has come out very strongly, that this is unacceptable and measures need to be taken to address this. And he's frequently addressed this at EU level. You're saying basically the scientific evidence that we base our setting quotas on is not being adhered to by both Iceland and Norway? Because there isn't a sharing arrangement?
Sorry, apologies.
Not at all. Because there isn't a sharing arrangement, an agreed sharing arrangement, it means that the total catches are going above the total allowable catch. The total allowable catch is set in line with scientific advice and has been for the last number of years, but without a sharing arrangement, then it means that that can be exceeded, which obviously is not good for stocks in the long run, which is one of the issues why the parties are pursuing negotiations to agree new sharing arrangements.
Okay.
I think just to add to that, Senator, if I may, the key tenet of the Common Fisheries Policy is to apply sustainable fisheries, and that the EU in itself, its policy is to fish within MSY and to ensure the sustainability of the stock.
Okay. In your contribution, you mentioned €3 million annually to the Irish fisher, which is the additional macro quota. Could you inform us what tonnage that is regarding, or how can we actually get an idea what the tonnage is in that quota itself?
Okay. In relation to tonnage, mackerel is about 1,769 tonnes for 2024, and it's over €1,600 a tonne. So.
Okay, not just an unusual way of putting it. I'm very much conscious of cough time. My last question is slightly off, and I apologise if you don't have the answer. That's very fair. Our national policy regarding landing fish, we have a national policy regarding quotas, but you can land the fish wherever you want to some degree. I know there's, like, you can go to Norway or you can go to Scotland. We don't have a policy about how much quota can be landed in Ireland regarding our fishers going forward. I know it's slightly off remit now. Basically what I'm trying to get at, that we have potential, that we have more landings off Ireland than actually in Irish ports itself, equating to our quota.
Senator, just so I understand your question, is that fleets of other EU member states?
No,
Irish states, Irish vessels are landing in other member states and in other countries, which within the EU they're perfectly entitled to land it.
Norway, Northern Ireland, UK.
With the Northern Ireland, we have the neighbourhood agreement. There was an ad, but they can land it there. As for Norway, I will have to ask Anna.
There are certain requirements for land, depending on the stocks that you're landing, that you may need to land into a specific, a designated port, depending on the stock and the amount that you're landing. But in general, there wouldn't be. I wouldn't be a control expert, but there wouldn't be a limit or a restriction on not landing into, if we say, another EU member state or non-EU member state, so long as you comply with the requirements in place regarding designated ports and so on.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. The vote has been finished in the Dáil. I'd say other members will be back shortly. Paul has indicated he does want to speak. I'll revert back to Deputy Fitzmaurice. No, Senator Daly does want to speak. This issue yet. Yeah.
In relation to the previous group that was in, they spoke about when Minister Creed was in office as Minister, that there was a pretty good report done at the time on the way forward. Is there, they spoke today about, say, the times are tough and that they need some, like, farmers get single farm payment. Is there any proposals in your department to try and help fishermen that way?
No, that's slightly outside the agenda. You don't have to answer if you don't want to.
Right.
Take the Senator's advice. I think that's not something that we were prepared to speak to today.
Pardon?
It's not something that we are prepared to speak to today based on the agenda.
Okay.
Okay, that's all.
That's fair enough. Literally